Thank you very much, Alan. Good morning, my name is Malachi O'Doherty and I'm the chair for today's event. We have three very important guests. Some of them, and perhaps all of them, are familiar to many of you as people who have appeared on television and in the media and spoken about their experience. Some of you maybe will have no familiarity with them at all, so I'll try and introduce them for you as best I can. On our far right is Maria Cahill. Maria was the niece of Joe Cahill, one of the founder members of the Provisional IRA. She has been described in the media as belonging to Provo royalty. I don't know how she feels about that herself. I see her smirking already. She, as a teenager, was committed to the Republican movement as a member, an activist within Sinn Féin, but she had a horrific experience over a period of some years, first involving sexual abuse by a member of the IRA, and later an investigation into that by the IRA in circumstances which were traumatic and carried with them the possible threat of her own execution for maligning the good name of a Provo soldier. So she'll tell us a bit about that. Beside Maria, we have Anne Travers. Anne Travers is her sister Maria. Let me get it right. She's the daughter, first of all, of the magistrate Tom Travers, who had been trying the case of Gerry Adams in 1983 for disorderly conduct during electioneering. Gerry Adams was shot coming from court at lunchtime. The trial was reset for some weeks later, and days before the trial was to be reheard, her family, excluding herself because she wasn't with him, but her father Tom, her mother and her sister Mary were ambushed by two IRA gunmen coming from church. Mary was killed. Her mother was spared, because the gun jammed. There were two guns used in the ambush, and her father was seriously wounded, which led to the cancellation of the trial of Gerry Adams, which had an historic impact in some ways, which we can explore if you wish. The historical inquiries team concluded that the attack had been an ambush on the whole family with the intention of killing all members of the family. On my left is Raymond McCord. Raymond is from a loyalist community, it's fair to say that, is it? Yeah. And his son was murdered by the UVF. So a paramilitary organisation within a community which would have defined its own terms and its own mission in terms of the defence or protection of that community murdered his son. Raymond has been an active campaigner in the media for justice for the memory of his son and justice for the killing of his son. He was also an applicant for the post of Victims Commissioner, and somebody who had spoken many times in the media about the experience of victims of troubles. And he wasn't shortlisted for the job because he was not regarded as having had sufficient media experience. If Raymond McCord hadn't sufficient media experience for the job, then nobody had, because he had a very high profile. I'll just disclose, while we're confidential, that I applied for the job myself at the same time, and I was not shortlisted because I was judged not to have sufficient acquaintance with the causes of conflict in Northern Ireland. So there you are, that happens. So these are the three speakers. The theme that we have this morning is integration, steps towards reconciliation. Sorry, I'm being distracted by reconciliation. So some might say, well, shouldn't we have more people here from other fields of some other representatives of other types of experience within the troubles in Northern Ireland? And maybe that is true, and I'm sure we have it in the audience. But we can't make it completely extensive. So we've gone for three powerful speakers with deep experience of going toe-to-toe, if you like, with the paramilitary organisations in Northern Ireland. And we will ask them to share their experience with us and to give us their thoughts on what reconciliation means to them or can mean. And I've asked them, just for the sake of alphabetical order in terms of Christian names, to start with Anne Travers, who has told me that I am perfectly welcome to shut her up if she rams on too much.
It's very true. And actually, what he really said outside was age before beauty. So I'm age, Maria's beauty. And Raymond just doesn't count as anything. Raymond's a man. How we choked on the Ben. First of all, I want to thank you immensely for inviting me here today. I can't tell you that Glebe House actually has a very personal, special place in my heart. My dad grew up in Strangford, and And when he was on the bench, he used to tell us a story about what he described as a wee fellow appeared up in front of him, who kept on appearing up in front of him. He was getting into trouble. His mother was in the court there with him. And Dad said to him one day, "Why do you keep on doing this? Why do you keep on appearing in front of me, you know? What is it? What can we do?" And he said, "If you do nothing, you get nothing. If you do something, you get a holiday in Glebe House." So Dad sent him, he had a week's holiday in Glebe House. He never appeared up in front of Dad again. But my grandparents are buried in Kilclief, and my father's buried in Kilclief, and my sister Mary is buried just in the cemetery. My great-grandparents, my great-uncles. So for my whole childhood, I remember doing that journey, the road, and feeling car sick by the time I reached the cemetery. And Dad used to always tell us that we were going past Glebe House. I'm just saying today, I still didn't know where it was. By that stage I reached there, I was so sick, I just couldn't even look to see where you were. So thank you. I'm the youngest of 6. I have 4 brothers, and I had one beautiful big sister. Mary was 8 years older than me. And my dad became a magistrate, we became a deputy magistrate in 1979. He had been a practicing solicitor for a number of years, and he had an office in Royal Avenue, which had been blown up a few times by the IRA. So he moved his office to Lower Malone Road, and we set up practice with another couple of colleagues. In 1978, those colleagues told him that they were going to open up their own practice because, as he was a Catholic, they felt that they weren't getting enough business. So this kind of disturbed my parents quite a lot, because we were brought up very, very, very middle of the road to respect other person's political persuasion. In fact, one of Mary's friends used to canvass for Sinn Féin, and she would meet him quite regularly. He seemed to wait for her and walk her to the bus stop and that, and they would speak in Irish because he's a fluent Irish speaker. It later turns out that this friend set up or helped set up my sister's murder and hid the gunmen in his flat. I found out that he did it because he admitted that he did it, as he was dying from testicular cancer at the age of 25. He asked his brother to pass on to me his admission and his part, but that he didn't regret it. He regretted Mary's murder, but not the shooting of my father. So that had massive trust issues for me. And for my brother Paul, who was a Queen at the time, and he too had been... You're asked stupid questions as a kid, and you're sort of told... I was 14, Mary was killed, and I was asked stuff like, "Does your dad carry a gun?" And I said, "No." I was already being called a snob because we lived in the Malone Road, and the last thing I wanted to even admit was that my dad was a judge. I was asked what mass he would go to. These are from friends of mine, and I would tell them. I later found out that one of the girls who was asking me those questions was actually a cousin of Paddy, my sister's friend. So on the 8th of April 1984, I suppose sometimes I was thinking about in the car coming up here, it's a bit like that film Sliding Doors, you know, where if you do one thing and something else happens. We were all filled with regrets after that day. My dad was full of regrets because he chose to go to Mass in the same place 2 weeks in a row, which was in our local parish church, which was in the next street to us. My brother Paul was full of regrets because Mary had asked him to go to Mass with them at 12 o'clock, and he couldn't be bothered getting out of his bed, and he didn't. So he regrets, he thinks that maybe the bullet might have taken him instead. My brother Hugh was full of regrets because although he did go to Mass with them, he didn't wait to walk home with Mum, Dad and Mary because he wanted to get home to watch University Challenge. And I'm full of regrets because the last thing, I'd had an argument with my sister the previous night because she wanted to help me with my sociology homework. I saw her that Sunday morning walking towards me in her red flowery dressing gown, and she said, "Morning, Anne," and I grunted at her because I thought, "Oh, you big lick, Dad's favourite," and I didn't want to have to do work with her. So Mum, Dad and Mary went off to 12 o'clock Mass. I'd already been to the youth Mass, and my mum sang in the choir then. And after Mass, Mum was gathering up the missalettes, and told Dad and Mary to just go on ahead. Mary was quite excited because she'd started her first teaching job in Holy Child in Andersonstown, and she was bringing her classroom over to make their first confessions that day, her class, her P3 boys. And Mum said, no, you go on ahead. But Dad and Mary bumped into friends of my dad's in the car park, and they had a little chat, and Mum caught up with them, and they were so happy. They were laughing, they were jostling. Dad was saying to Mum, oh, you leave this is my Mary, your stands in beside me, and they were laughing, and Mary was talking about the hymn she was going to be singing with the kids at school. And Mum, they were walking up Windsor Avenue, and Mum looked at Mary just so proud and said to my dad, doesn't Mary look beautiful? And Mary, with her beautiful little smile, said, oh Mum, do you like this? And she held up the collar of her blouse, which she just bought. It was new, and she was delighted she was able to buy herself things. And with that, they heard a shot. And at this point, they were at the entrance to the tennis courts in Windsor Avenue. And Dad's good friend, Judge Billy Doyle, had been murdered coming out from that same mass the previous year. And he thought he heard somebody in the tennis court say somebody has been shot. So he stepped in and he turned around, and he said he could see a man coming towards him who looked wild. And he was waving something, and he could see he was waving something underneath newspapers. Turns out it's the Catholic Universe newspapers, ironically. And Dad said to him, he looked him straight in the eyes, and he said, what do you want? And the man said, it's you that we want. And at the same time, Mary turned towards Dad and said, Daddy, that man has a gun. And then there was another gunshot, another gunshot. Dad felt a bullet go into his shoulder, and he later said the bullet itself didn't put him down on the ground, but he went down on the ground because he wanted Mary and Mum to run. He didn't know that there was another gunman. He thought Mary was talking about the one that he was looking at. And he lay on the ground, and he said he closed his eyes, and as each bullet went into him, there were 6 of them, that went into his legs, his upper body, and his stomach. He thought each one was going to be his last, and he was waiting for the bullet to come in the head. In the meantime, Mary had been shot, a single bullet in her back, and she fell into my mum's arms and knocked Mum down onto the ground. And as Mum was lying on the ground, the gunman walked over to my mum and held the gun to her forehead and pulled the trigger. But miraculously, the bullets jammed in the gun. Mum was left with gunshot burns, which she had for a number of days afterwards. The first I knew what had happened, I was in my bedroom. I just had little mini cheese and tomato frozen pizza. Well, it wasn't frozen when I had it, obviously cooked it. And my brother Paul came running down to the bedroom and said, quick, Mum, Dad and Mary have been shot. And I couldn't understand. And he said, quickly, he got quite annoyed with me. He went into my parents' bedroom and he was on the police radio, given the passwords. Only bit security that we had. Dad said he couldn't carry a gun, he couldn't have a police bodyguard, he couldn't put anybody else's life at risk, and he knew he could never use a gun to take another person's life. And I ran down and I heard my brother Martin on the phone in the kitchen phoning an ambulance. And as I ran down Windsor Avenue, I no longer was this 14-year-old stroppy kid who didn't want to do her sociology homework. I can just say I was a child. I was like a 4-year-old crying, Daddy, Daddy, where's my daddy? And when I got down, the scene that I saw was my dad lying on the ground, Mum hunched over him saying, my husband, somebody please help my poor husband. And I saw Mary lying some bit away from the feet of my father. Somebody had obviously lifted her from off my mum. She was lying very, very, very still, but she was gurgling, and her head should have been like that, but it was like that. She was lying awkwardly. And it was bedlam. She was put into an ambulance. My brother Paul said she'll be all right, won't she? He was told no. I went up to the house, and for some bizarre reason rang my best friend at that time and told her that my parents had been shot, Mary had been shot. I was hysterical. And then I hung up the phone. So the weeks and that went on, and Dad's funeral was delayed because Mary's funeral was delayed because they thought Dad was going to pass away as well. But thank God he didn't. And then we had a court case, and the only person who was ever convicted and who was found just shortly from the scene was a woman called Mary Ann McCardle, and she was found with the guns and wigs down her surgical stockings.
Can I thank you for that,
Yeah.
and say we'll come back to that story, because it's really quite moving as it is, and I want people to retain that,
Okay.
and but also move to the other speakers to bring them into the stage and come back to it.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for that. Maria, I know that's a hard one to follow.
Absolutely. And I think, I know Anne a long time, now a good amount of years. And I've heard her experiences over those years, but again, I think every time you sit and listen to it, it is that feeling of hers on the back of the neck. And one of the reasons probably why it is so descriptive and so vivid for you is because of the absolute trauma and horror that you were put through. And no person should be put through that for any reason. I grew up almost like Anne in the middle of the road estate, an alliance, Fulton estate, which the neighbours always got stick for over the years. But Malachy's quite right. I come from a family, an extended family which is completely entrenched in republicanism and has been for generations. My father's side of the family, my mother's side of the family aren't political at all. And actually, we had almost the best of both worlds when we were growing up, because I grew up in a very safe, very small street, just 14 houses in it, in a middle class area in Andersonstown. My mother is a primary school principal, and my father was he worked for himself, he was a businessman. But both grannies lived, one in Turf Lodge, which would be almost official IRA territory, and the other grandmother lived in Ballymurphy, which is provisional IRA territory, and the rivalry between both was stark over the years, because you couldn't even walk from one house in the estate to the other without getting a threat of a beating with a hurley stick, if you were seen coming from one to the other. My own venture into the political life came around the age of probably late 15, 16, when I started working in the West Belfast Festival voluntarily in a radio station, which was run by, call a spade, mostly run by the Republican movement, or people who had had an association with republicanism. And I came across this fella who is now a politician in Dublin, a guy called Owen O'Brien, who was full of enthusiasm and energy and absolutely attractive mind-wise to any young person coming through. And because of my surname, the Cahill surname would have been well known in West Belfast, I from time to time think whether you were sought out to move towards in that direction from people who would have seen that you can carry a sentence, or maybe you're articulate at that age or whatever, or whether I was just simply drawn towards it because that was the experience of people who had been older than me and had gone down that route. And it was good crack. We had an absolutely manic time. The radio station ran twice a year for 4 weeks in the summer and 4 weeks again in the run up to St Patrick's Day, full of madness. At one point you could have 20 Mexican mariachi people who come over for the festival, stand and playing, in front of an open mic on the radio. And at other times, you were sitting with people who were smoking joints all around you. So it was just one of those absolutely attractive to a 16-year-old, on her summer holidays working away. And the political conversations, I suppose, within all of that were also attractive to me. Politics is something that I kind of live and breathe anyway. So, it was a bit of a recipe for disaster for me. And I started becoming involved in an organisation called Sinn Féin Youth, which at that point probably was small enough. I think probably the most activism that OGRA or Sinn Féin Youth were ever involved in was climbing up onto the roof of the City Hall and unfurling the release all the POWs banner, or standing aside, because at that point it was 96, 97, the first ceasefire had been called in 94. There was activity happening on the periphery, but largely things had started to die down a bit. So that's how I ended up in. And when I was in, you know, and I'm always fairly honest about it, it was very enjoyable, you know. And I always describe the Republican movement and both sides of the Republican movement almost as one large dysfunctional family, you know, and it is completely attractive to anybody who is 16 or 17 coming into that, and particularly somebody who would be in a vulnerable position, because you have all of these people who are in their 40s and 50s that the community put on a pedestal. I never really was one for pedestals, and I don't accept the Republican royalty tag. It's something that's extremely embarrassing, but you know, it's there. You know, so that was the kind of journey into that side of things, and I remained there for a number of years. But when I was 16, I had just turned 16 in May 1997, and I had started in the radio station round about the end of June, start of July, in the run-up to the August Festival. Was working 18.5-hour days. My parents had a holiday home in Donegal, so you know, they were up there for most of the summer. And my aunt had been going out with a man who we actually didn't really know very well, because he had been in jail for an armed IRA operation, in which strangely he claimed when he was arrested he was a member of the UVF and was charged with UVF membership, but it was a cash and carry robbery that he had partaken in. So he had just been released, you know, around about the year before that, and he became involved, as prisoners do when they're released. They tend to have jobs or positions gifted to them within the community, and he started on the management of the West Belfast Festival alongside people like Jerry Adams, who was the chair at the time, Sue Ramsey, Siobhan O'Hanlon, who was a cousin of mine and who was Adams' secretary, and Danny Morrison, and other people also. And he rang my parents and said, Maria's having a great time in the radio station. She doesn't want to go to Donegal on her holidays. You should let her stay with us. We look after her, you know, we make sure she's up and down. My father and mother were both concerned because I had lost weight. Obviously, they didn't want their child working 18.5-hour days, or, you know, running about in a station full of what they would have seen as lunatics. You know, and I was fairly stubborn and had put my foot down. And they agreed on the basis that I would be looked after and that I wasn't going to be allowed to be there all day. And the normal things, you know, she's not allowed to drink. My mother's very strict, you know, and make sure that she abides by the rules that we would set for her at home. And obviously that didn't happen. And, you know, round about the end of July, start of August, I was staying in Martin Morris's house and my Aunt Ellen's house at the time, and had come home late from working in the radio station, had sat in the living room, had been offered a tin of beer and was afraid to take it, simply because my aunt was there and I was afraid of her going ballistic. And she told me to wise up, that she didn't have a problem with me having a drink, and I took a tin of heart. And, you know, probably couldn't even keep up with the drinking session that was going on. It was just him and her. I took a couple of drinks, put down the tin, and fell asleep on the settee. And, you know, without going into the details after that, was awoken and remained sleeping because I was too afraid to let the person know that I was awake. And that was the start of my sexual abuse. So that went on round about a year, probably just over a year. And within all of that, I should have probably also mentioned that the man in question was also the head of the IRA's punishment squad, or the civil administration team in the Upper Springfield area. He had a fairly fearsome reputation for anybody that came across him. He, just before the abuse, had sat down with a man named Joe McCulloch, who had sat in the living room with me and had asked me to move guns on behalf of the IRA. I didn't move the guns, but that conversation, I believe, was set up in order to A, make me aware that the man had access to weaponry so that I wouldn't disclose, and B, just instill one wee bit of fear and control, an extra bit on top of that. So all of that was playing, and also in any case of abuse, people generally don't tend to disclose as it's happening or the minute that it happens, and that was something that I probably will have to live with for the rest of my life, because my grandmother's house was next door, and I remember the first night fighting with myself to just go in and tell, and didn't, you know, and we are where we are now with that. And to cut a long story short, I eventually couldn't cope with what was happening to me, and I thought that I was pregnant. I got drunk one night and told my cousin, Siobhan, and Siobhan was aware as the abuse was continuing. She's dead now, she died of breast cancer in 2006. And I also then subsequently told Sue Ramsey, who up until recently, conveniently enough, just before the Spotlight programme came out, resigned her seat, and another woman called Rosa McLaughlin, who had just been released for IRA activity and who I would have been friendly with. So those three women were acutely aware that there was a man who was abusing someone who, and I was at the time a minor. And also then there was a suspicion that he may have also been involved in abusing other children, and not one of them did anything, except one went behind my back to the IRA, which I subsequently found out when a year later the IRA came to me and forced an investigation into my abuse. I never made a complaint to the IRA, and that's something that I always have to make the distinction on because I don't think it's clear. That first investigation lasted for 6 months. It was a repeated questioning of me and my sexual abuse. I was told that the volunteer had rights as an IRA man, and he wasn't made aware of it until February or March. And the minute that he became aware of it, they then forced a confrontation. They brought me into a room in Andersonstown, in a flat in Kennard Avenue, to face him, along with 3 fairly high-ranking IRA volunteers, and that was extremely traumatic for me. At the end of that investigation, they decided it was inconclusive. And that they were going to tell my parents, with the instruction of my parents that they couldn't then tell anybody about my abuse. So my father couldn't even tell his own mother, and my mother's mother only found out in 2010. 4 months later, on the 23rd of July 2000, a young child who was around about 12, I think at the time, tried to kill herself, said that she had also been abused by the same man, and her sister then came out. She was in Romania, came back 2 days later and was questioned and said that the same thing had happened to her. The man was, without my knowledge, taken away and put under house arrest, and the IRA then facilitated his escape out of his sister's house where he was being held. And that then kicked off 2 meetings with the IRA Army Council, or 2 representatives, and myself. So it wasn't a great time for me as a 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old by this stage. And a story appeared in the Sunday World in relation to this investigation, which we had no control over. It was extremely upsetting for me. And then Jerry Adams pops up and asks me to go and meet him. I refused. In the first instance, he was in the festival marquee, came back 10 minutes later and asked again, and I agreed to go. The conditions on the meetings with Adams was that it had to be on a one-on-one basis, so I wasn't able to bring anybody in for support. And I met him right through until 2006. And the rest is almost history. Except for the fact that now I took a police complaint in 2010, sat through 4 years of an investigation that went on. The court cases collapsed in April and May of last year, and in complete frustration. And also with a view to exposing my abuser, who obviously is never now going to be found guilty in a court. I wanted people to know, A, who he was, and B, what he looked like, so that they could take the decision themselves not to allow their children to go near him. Yep.
Can I wrap it up there at the moment, and we'll come back to it? The story, as many people already know, is that the collapse of the trial was then investigated by Sir Keir Starmer, who held basically the Director of Public Prosecutions to account for the bad management of the case.
He was a senior figure. Right. Wasn't president at the time. Rang his handlers from the Maze prison on 2 occasions to tell them that young Raymond was going to be murdered. And this is documented in the debriefing that will come out in the future. The Special Branch handlers had that information and done nothing. Didn't inform the CID, didn't inform Raymond. And to let the murder take place. People all turn around and they talk about murders, we've seen it there, and for some of them it was getting the police and having the police. This isn't about that. It's about telling the truth. It is. After the murder, nothing came from the police. Rather than that happen, I found myself being stopped at checkpoints by the police, being arrested by the police. I was actually in a graveyard with a man. The police arrested me and took me to Golf Barracks and held me for 3 days. There wasn't a hammer in the car, a knife, anything that there. But they arrested me on the terrorist laws. While in Kilclief, an inspector who was based there, a Christian one, who attended the same church as my sister, who's a Christian, told me I shouldn't be here, and it wasn't downhill. It was a special branch. The UVF had made numerous attempts to murder me. And one night, I lived 5 doors from the police station, York Road. 3 gunmen came at 3 o'clock in the morning. And just by chance, I'd woken a couple of minutes earlier, and I looked out the front window. 5 doors from the police station, the camera and all taken straight up. The gunmen tried to get into my house. No mass, seen who they were. One of the gunmen was the actual father of the man that murdered my son. I rang 999 2 or 3 times, and the police got a spot at them from the station, caught them, and the police failed to respond to 999 calls. They were allowing the murder to take place, an intended murder. They couldn't get in because of an Alsatian dog, and the dog kept the 3 gunmen out. The police eventually arrived. One officer asked me was it okay, and walked away. You know, and that's been the treatment from the police from day one. We got a report out in 2007 from Newell alone, stating that there was collusion in my son's murder.
Some people might not know who Newell alone is.
Newell alone was the police ombudsman for Northern Ireland, governor appointee, a lovely lady in every way, honest. I went there 3-4 years previously, and he started telling this story. Newell admitted me years later. She didn't believe it. It just seems so bizarre and extreme. You know, police don't do that. They do some old crap, but it couldn't be that bad. It was worse. To investigate it, to find out that the man who ordered Raymond's murder, I believe was involved up in 20 murders, 10 attempted murders, and a lot of other crime. And all this time, he was working for the police. And I was fortunate to get access to police documentation from decent policemen who showed in the documentation Mark Haddock admitting murders by sitting in the back of a car, firing bullets in the back of a man's head, himself with 2 handlers. He was given an envelope, got out of the car, and he went away. His first kill was in '93, Sean McKenna. He met his Saunders the next day. I met his Saunders from it. And they've told me that Mark Haddock admitted the murder. They went back to police headquarters, but they weren't allowed to arrest him. And they had to arrest him in '93. At least 19 other people would have been alive, including my son. But the cover-up, after cover-up, and discussing. But Newell herself brought the report out in 2007, which the British government accepted Tony Blair and apologised in Westminster. It was the first case ever in the history of troubles that collusion was proven. It said about the police officers including in Raymond's murder. We expected action then. Not one police officer has been charged. Not one police officer has been arrested. Given the names. As a result of that, decided it's only this week that I intend to bring the British government in the European court, hopefully, for war crimes. Not just young Raymond's case, but other crimes. And that is a case of, again, advice to Brits, to them from the Unionist community. This is a case where the British government allowed a young man to be executed, along with many other people, pre-warned, and the people who they were paying allowed to kill with no worries whatsoever. You know, and I've seen it over the years, dealing with many victims, and the stories are very similar. And for me personally, you know, it's like watching something like the old film Oliver Twist. You're going with a begging bowl, give us more, and the more I want is truth and justice.
Can I just interject here at the moment? What Raymond is saying sounds extraordinary and extreme, but the British government, David Cameron, commissioned a report from Justice Casey Desmond Silva to investigate the background to the murder of another man, an IRA, well, a member, be careful what I say about him, the solicitor called Pat Finucane. And the De Silva report is one of the most detailed, it is the most detailed account we could possibly have of the activities of Special Branch. And it is fully acknowledged by the British government, it is fully acknowledged by them that Special Branch on many occasions failed to pass on information about people who were targeted for murder, if they regarded those people who were targeted for murder as a thorn in the side. And so no information was passed on 3 separate occasions that Pat Finucane was to be killed, was to be attacked. And so the Raymond story about the Special Branch getting information about the attack on his son is fully consistent with what is entirely on the record in the De Silva report. I'm right, aren't I? Yeah. So just to wrap up from there, but just to authenticate what you're saying to some extent. Sorry, did you want to come there?
I know that the theme here today is reconciliation. And I know that certainly Glebe House has done so much to help young people and people who just stopped, to help prevent them from getting into trouble. And people often talk about reconciliation, and they might maybe look at people like myself and Raymond and Maria, because we don't come out and say we forgive and therefore we can all be reconciled. You know, that's on looking at you, the lovely quilt on the wall with all the hands joining. For me personally, I feel very at ease with myself. I don't feel the need to forgive the gunmen who murdered my sister and destroyed my family, because I don't feel it's my place. I believe in God, and I believe that one day they'll face God, and that's between them. If they were to come to me and say, we're really sorry for what we did, and we wish we hadn't done it, and we had no right to do it, all the handshakes with all the great and the good that we've had in the last couple of years should have been done back in the early 70s, and then so many lives have been saved. Well, then I could go, okay, we all just want to live our lives. I don't know one single solitary victim who wants another human being to suffer. I don't know one single solitary victim who wants to go out and get revenge. I know that I had an opportunity at the age of 17, when I just learned how to drive, to actually knock Paddy, I'm not going to say his surname, purely for my respect for his family, who are a good family, to knock him down on the Malone Road as he crossed over at Methody. And my mum was in the car beside me. Paddy was crossing over the road. I put my foot in the accelerator and then braked and stopped. And quite literally, he was there from the bonnet of my mum's car. And she said, she put her hand on my knee and she turned and she looked at me and she said, Anne, you'd be as bad as they are. And from that moment, it's just reconciliation and forgiveness. You know, it's... Can
I bring up a point that is raised by both Maria's story and by Raymond's, and that is the state handling of these murders, these affairs, these awful stories. In Maria's case, the state let her down, and that's validated that the state let her down in failing to get a proper trial underway. In Raymond's case, the story is consistent with stories that we've heard before about after the fact collusion. How have your dealings with the state been? Do you feel that at least you lived within a society in which there was good policing, good healthy rule of law, and that the story and the need for justice for you and your family has been well managed?
Well, it hasn't. My father passed away in 2009, still looking for justice for his daughter, and found out some dreadful stuff. As he died from lung cancer, he never smoked, in which a special branch officer came forward and gave details to Dad that he was a handler for an agent, and this agent had got in touch with him a couple of days after Mary's murder and said he was being sent in to clean up the flat where the gunmen had hid. And this handler phoned his boss, and he said, look, will we go in? He's given us a chance to go in and retrieve any evidence that we can beforehand. And his handler said, no, it's 5 o'clock, I'm off home, let him go in and clean it up. The suspicion is that Steak Knife, who you might have heard from, used that flat himself, and that there may well have been forensic evidence there linking him with this flat. But in saying that, there are many, many, many good and decent policemen and women, and yes, we have been let down. Dad identified the man who attempted to murder him. He was acquitted because of how he was identified, and instead of being identified with an unusual witness, where you would be he wouldn't see my dad, and they'd be able to do it anonymously. Dad was brought into a room. This man had been arrested. He was let go. He was then re-arrested within minutes. He was sitting behind the table. Dad was brought into the same room and identified in that way. So it was a legal technicality why this man got it off. Later, rumours, Sunday newspaper said that he was actually a police agent as well. I don't know. Do you know what? I just don't know. I feel deeply let down by the British government. I feel deeply hurt. My father was a Catholic who went and sat on the bench at a time when nobody wanted to be a judge, let alone a Catholic. He paid the ultimate sacrifice, and that was with his daughter's life, and with all of our lives. And after Joseph Hockey was acquitted, my father went over to England and got in a car and drove to a pier. My father is a deeply religious Catholic man, and he was about to drive himself over that pier. And I don't know what stopped him, but it did. But it broke him, completely broke him. So yes, I feel completely let down, and I'm tired, and I am tired of victims being lied to. I think that we need to have transparency, we need to have accountability, and we need, no matter who it means, whether it means that somebody senior members of Sinn Féin or senior members of whoever, MPs, whoever, are prosecuted and are brought to, that's what they need to do, because victims have been the bottom of the pile, and we will never have reconciliation in Northern Ireland while victims are still down here. And you will have everybody else. You'll have ex-prisoners, you'll have MLAs, everybody else is up here, and if you go down like a triangle, victims are sitting here, big heap at the bottom, because victims don't speak. They were so traumatised. If they put their head above the parapet, they're called all sorts of names, and that's how they don't do it.
This is one of the things that has struck me as well, and we brought this up on the radio programme, we were discussing it this morning, and I think it is true of all three of you, Raymond. What we saw after Maria's story was first disclosed on the television on the Spotlight programme, and what we have seen also in response to Anne telling the story, is dogs abuse on social media. Absolute filthy abuse from I don't know how many people, but on a fairly, very unnerving, annoying scale. Have you anything in your own experience that
yeah, I've had it, people on social media, they're complaining. My name and photo and bullets point towards my head, complaining to the police. We had a victims group set up in Belfast, helping an eye, completely cross community, and the police came there, done absolutely nothing. And what it is, and I agree with what I'm saying, victims are really at the bottom of the ladder. We're looking all the talk about reconciliation. I don't know about reconciliation when we see the people who are community workers on most occasions, and I see it particularly within unionist areas, are paramilitaries who are still extorting money from businessmen and the drug dealers in Belfast. Shankill, East Belfast, Shore Road, where I'm from, right? The paramilitaries control the areas. But the community workers in big money, £30,000 a year, 22,000, are paramilitaries. Right? There's a girl here who went to the policing board to have him on removed from the policing board. He was exposed on the spotlight, I think it was TV, like the Irvine. You see it in the papers and all said, hiding behind the balaclava and speaking. Right? Went to the policing board several times. Jerry Kelly that is. We got promises and all made. And he's still a community worker. And he still sits in the policing board. How is that beneficial to victims? Right? When people like ourselves come and tell their stories, the stories shouldn't need to be told now. These people.
Well, the answer would be from those who manage the peace process that there would be no peace. There can be no reconciliation other than with the most offensive people. It's the people who generated the violence who have to be in some way reconciled to each other if you're to have peace. If you leave them out of it, then you may have some wonderful love in the middle ground, but you're not going to get an end to violence. There's a logic to that.
Well, the logic is what you're saying and what they're saying. Let's make these people special people. Let's make these killers, these murderers, these people right, who control the areas, have no interest in democracy. Let's make them special people and buy them. And it's like the bully at school, the kid went to school and someone then taking 50p off him. 50p is not enough. They end up with a fiver. And that's what these people. And the government have endorsed them. The political people have endorsed them. Right there. The Good Friday Agreement, right there, and I opposed it. And I opposed it for one reason. That the prisoners there, right, done the crimes, let them do their time. Right? Victims were sold out over the Good Friday Agreement. And I can understand people voting for it because they wanted the peace. But I listened to a programme one time, I think it was a Frank Mitchell show, a lady from a middle class background talking about victims and there being some issues. And she said, why don't they get on with their lives? Why don't they just get on with their lives? And I'm sitting in the car listening to this and sitting there, I'd love to be able to speak to her. If it was your son was murdered and buried in a closed coffin, would you turn around and just say, I'll get on with my life and I'll forget about it? You know, that hasn't been brought home to people, right? And we still are ignored, and we're second-class citizens. We're treated as if we are the problem.
Let me turn to Maria, because Raymond is describing a fairly dark view of the working class community in loyalist areas, where people who are godfathers or criminal backgrounds are pampered and supported. You've been inside the Republican community and you've seen who the community workers are and so on. Would you have a similar cynical view of that?
I do, absolutely. I've written about it in the past, and I completely take Raymond's point about control and that community control that happens within it. But also, I think the main mistake that people make is that they dehumanise people along and they treat them all as a homogenous group. And as unpalatable or uncomfortable as it may be, some of the people who were involved in those organisations were involved and they made their choices and they should take responsibility for them, but they were involved because of the circumstances in which they grew up in. So, that's the first thing. And the second thing in relation to the accountability, and that runs through the community sector as well. Absolutely, people were gifted and jobs were boxed off and money was siphoned off European projects and put into paramilitary groups, and that still actually happens to this day in some areas. And if it isn't put into armed groups, it's put into and I do think there is that sense of appeasement also. But when you break it down, and I think Anne's point is probably the main thing that resonates with me, is that you don't get any sense of justice without accountability, and you may not get it in a court of law, but you certainly will not get it if people do not take responsibility. That's a separate argument. I also think that some of those places, like West Belfast, and I include the Shankill on it, people living there, people who haven't been involved in anything have gotten extremely lofty because they have lived in communities that have been controlled. They are demonised, and everybody, I do remember after the murder of the two corporals, I think it's House and Woods, which happened actually just up the street from us, that feeling, which is where the West Belfast Festival sprung from, that everybody was treated as savages because of it, and it was probably one of the most traumatic things, and I was very young at the time, that I remember growing up in that area. It's almost a signal to shut up. No, but that, all of that kind of plays into it, Malachy, and it feeds into the narrative, and I think part of the thing in relation to reconciliation is that you need to be able to get to a stage where you can tell your side of the story, Anne, and I accept it entirely for what it is, and you can also then tell my side of the story, and I accept that you're telling that as well. And I think our place, or this place, whatever you want, label you want to attach to it, puts an awful lot of stock into the us and them argument without actually taking yourself out of that position and putting yourself into someone else's shoes. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why we do get on so well, is because we both accept, probably, you have a standpoint in relation to, aside from what happened to you in relation to issues which we argue over all the time, and you argue over mine, but that's essentially what it is.
But let's be honest, I mean, people in Maria's family would have been quite happy about the shooting of your sister and your father.
Maria's not responsible for them.
No.
I met Maria in 2011, and one of the very first things that she said to me was, what happened to your family was wrong and was awful. And as soon as she said that, my wall went down, because to be honest, that's all I want to hear. I want to hear Martin McGuinness, instead of, at the time, the whole SPAD controversy, which you may or may not know about.
Well, maybe Phil is in a wee bit briefly on that.
Well,
or would I need to paraphrase?
Well, no, Maria said there about people being rewarded, and on the 18th of May 2011, I heard that the only person convicted of my sister's murder had been rewarded as a special advisor to the Sinn Féin Culture Minister. These positions are gifted, and they're tax-funded positions. It had a devastating effect on me because I immediately relived what happened to us, and I had put that in the box. I'd moved off to England, and I'd moved back to Dublin, and I thought I'd dealt with stuff, but I hadn't. And actually it just emphasised to me more the necessity to keep on telling the stories, because victims' stories, it's very nice, shove us under the carpet. Who wants to hear the reality that there's a son, a father, a daughter, it's people, and you're the loving people, nobody had the right to go along and decide to murder my dad because he was a magistrate. Nobody had that right, and I would like to hear Martin McGuinness say to me, that we didn't have the right to do that. So I think that's why Maria and I get on so well together. People would look and go, how odd, Anne Travers and Maria Capel, that's just really, that's bizarre. We both see each other as individuals. And Maria, as I said, she broke down the walls me immediately. I could not but be moved and shocked by what happened to her. And, together we respect each other, and I think that's what it comes down to. I trust her and I respect her. And I said earlier on about trust being an issue for me. I sit in the victims forum, and I've met lots of different people, and I've met and spoke with people from Sinn Féin, and met different groups, and they can say one thing to my face. For example, the pensions issue. They can say one thing to my face, and then I would hear them say something completely different. And I don't want that. I don't want any more bull. I just want people to be honest with me. I'm 46, I've had cancer, I'm not particularly well, and I want a good place for my children to grow up and my grandchildren to grow up, and I don't want anybody else to experience what we've experienced and what we lived through.
Can I ask you, Raymond, about your place within the community that you grew up now? Do you have a place within that community, or would you be? I mean, Maria, for instance, had graffiti on the walls about her, in the area close to where she was abused, where her family grew up. Are you well placed within the community still, or are you estranged from it?
Well, one way I'm well placed because the son lives in Rathcoole, his partner and kids. And it's the state I grew up in. But the rain all the son-in-law was terrible with graffiti. But to me, the UDF on something that's never done troubles. They launched 4 poster campaigns against them and put posters up in a lot of loyalist areas over a number of years. Called me a bully boy.
Were you a bully boy? Were you a hard man?
Well, I can face tells it.
Oh, I know.
Well, I had a reputation as a street fighter
Yeah.
on my own. No convictions for assault. And 99% of the fights were against paramilitaries growing up. I went with a Catholic girl in Rothschool. His family was put out. And trouble started then. So I had a reputation. And I had to live with it all over the years, still have to. In bars in Belfast, he was socialising. The UVF sometimes sent people into bars to hit me. I was forced to they got hurt. But it was done openly, fairly, right? So, but UVF described me as a bully boy. Where's my son? Dropped concrete blocks in his head. They shot Catholic women dead at the door. They shot before 3 Catholic lads death in Ballymoney. This goes on, and they call me a bully boy for standing up for himself. My family's homes get shot up, their sons get attacked, their sons are in bad health, and yet they call me a bully boy for defending myself. But the police, and that rather than arrest people, the night my wife's house was shot up, one of my sons seen the 2 gunmen, and they weren't masked. They were neighbours who lived at the bottom of the street, and they got the names on to this day that they haven't been questioned. But I'm in a fight with paramilitaries, right? The police come to question me on it.